Hello, hello. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. Can I just say, wasn't that update about DTI just amazing? How awesome is it that we get to spend a time, at least 1 week every summer, where young people can come together and meet the Lord in a powerful and genuine way? And those stories, if that's all we had as a church, wouldn't that be beautiful? It's just the best. Good morning. My name is Pete. As I mentioned beforehand, I head up the student ministry here at MV, and I have the absolute pleasure of speaking to you today. And if you're new here or visiting, or maybe this is your first time in church, I just want to say again, you're so welcome. It's so awesome that you could be here. But first off, I want to ask the question, do you ever look at something, watch something, read something, or go somewhere, and you know that someone else is having a totally different experience to you? I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and one of my favorite films growing up as a kid were the Herbie films. I just loved them. They're a group of films, the first of which came out in the 1960s, and it's based around a VW Beetle race car that kind of has a life of its own. And the central theme is that Herbie is fast. This car can beat anyone. And even though they're quite old by the time I got around to watching them as a kid, I didn't care. They were my absolute favorite. I'd watch them over and over and over, and it genuinely got to the point where every Christmas and every birthday, I was guaranteed some sort of VW Beetle paraphernalia, from toy cars to T-shirts. I even had a towel with one of them on. I mean, I loved it. It was great. I recently rewatched that first Herbie film again. And I'll be honest, objectively, I know it's not a great film. Like, the graphics are appalling, the acting isn't great, many of the jokes aren't that funny, and the picture quality is pretty naff. And yet, it brought back such fond memories and just so many emotions of just seeing that Beetle getting up to all the mischief and hurtling around the track and winning races. I guarantee many of you would watch those films and think they were absolutely pants. And in some ways, you'd be right. But for me, they will always have a special place in my heart. In a different way, just the other week, I was visiting some friends and driving through the city that I studied in. And I had a similar experience. The city, I would say, isn't particularly glamorous. It's not the prettiest, it's not the cleanest, it's got a road network that frankly makes no sense. And from personal experience, I can confirm that some of the Chinese takeaways will really put your stomach to the test. I can see that many might not particularly be enamored with it. However, this city was the place that I spent 3 years of my life. It was the place I rediscovered Jesus in a powerful and unchangeable way. It was where I made friendships that shaped me and made me. It was where I faced almost crippling anxiety and powered through. It was where I was chased by a man heavily under the influence, shouting at me, "I am the law," which I mistakenly thought was him quoting Les Mis. It wasn't. It wasn't. My heart was broken for that place, and I came to love it. Other people might see nothing particularly impressive, and that's fine, perfectly understandable even, but I got the chance to see some of its gold, and that leaves a mark. The same thing has happened to me here in Manchester. I love this place deeply. Jesus has done something in me over my time here which has left a deep attachment and perspective on this city that many simply might not have. But he's done something in me that means I get to see Manchester a little more the way I think Jesus sees it. I often ask the question, how long do you have to be living in Manchester before you can call it an honorary Mancunian? To any who know the answer, I'd like to know, because that's how I feel. However, loving the place you're in is something that I think we can sometimes miss as followers of Jesus. Perhaps we think we sort of like the place, but it's half-hearted. Perhaps we've grown accustomed to it and become a bit lazy in how we view it. Perhaps we think we're only here for a short time, and so you never really allow yourself to really be broken for it. Often, I actually think we're just so focused on what's next, we forget to see what's now. We need to be a people that love the place our 2 feet stand. We could be here for just a few months, We could be somewhere for many years. But we don't want to miss the chance of what Jesus might have for us. We need to recognize that whilst we can so easily get focused on the next step, on the next stage, on the next move, we actually need to focus on this step, on this stage. That we are here right now, and that could well be because this is where Jesus wants us to be, and we've got to own it. When we realize this truth, we not only get to see more of what God sees, but allows us to partner with more of what Jesus is doing in the very place we're in. Our tagline at this church is Love Manchester. As followers of Jesus, we need to be a people who shape where we live and also allow the place we live to shape us. Manchester should look different because Manchester Vineyard is here. And a key way of doing that is allowing ourselves to love this place and allowing Jesus to open our hearts for it. Because when we do that, we see more of Jesus in ourselves and we bring more of Jesus right here. So today, we're going to look at a well-known passage from Scripture that actually appears in 3 of the 4 Gospels where Jesus heals the demon-possessed man. And we'll be looking at what this can tell us about the place we live in. And then next we'll touch upon a few practical points about how we can do this before we open up space to meet with Jesus. So, the passage we're going to be looking at is from Luke 8. It's a bit of a long one. It's from verse 26 to 39. And it goes like this. They sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him, and they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs were feeding there on the hillside, and the demon begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demon came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this to the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. To give a bit of context for this passage, we meet Jesus here where his ministry is really rolling. He's called his 12 disciples. His teaching is well known and powerful. He's healing as he goes. He's recently raised a child from dead to life. And immediately before this passage, he's crossed the Sea of Galilee and commanded the storm to be still. It's fair to say that Jesus has been through a lot. And yet, it says Jesus arrives in the region of the Gerasenes, and as he steps onto the shore, he is immediately met by a demon-possessed man from the local town. Just quickly, I want to make the point that I find it incredible that we don't know this man's name, because he is clearly known locally. He's naked, he lives around the tombs, and in Mark's gospel, it says that this man would break chains that tied him, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. If someone where I lived was naked, lived around a graveyard, and could literally break metal with his bare hands, I think his name would be pretty widely mentioned and noted down. But anyway, this nameless man, nameless man is possessed by many demons. And Jesus casts out these demons into the 2,000 nearby pigs, who drown themselves, and the man is immediately healed. When the local town people come out, they find this man, who for a long time would terrorize the area and terrorize himself. And what do? They see him fully clothed and at the feet of Jesus. And they see the 2,000 dead pigs, and they plead with Jesus to leave. They're more fearful of their own livelihoods and what Jesus might do to their goods than they care for the amazing healing works of Jesus. But then, just as Jesus, who's only just got there after the history and all that he's done up to this point, just as Jesus is about to get back into the boat, this man who is healed, this nameless man, begs Jesus to go with him. You can imagine the sight. This man who until recently had been physically restrained by metal chains, and it said he would cut himself, he would cut his skin with stones. He's therefore still likely wearing the physical scars from his possession. But he's there, he's fully clothed, he's in his right mind after this life-changing encounter with the Son of God, and he begs Jesus to go with him. And note that he doesn't ask. He doesn't humbly walk up to Jesus and just take him aside and politely see if there's any space in the boat. No, he begs. He begs Jesus to go with him. He's desperate to leave, desperate to go where Jesus is going. But what is Jesus' response? He says no. He tells the man to return home. Return to those people that have just rejected Jesus and told this miracle worker they don't want him there. And he tells him to go and tell them of the work the Lord has done in his life. The point I want to make here is this. I think we so often get so busy focusing on what's next. Where am I going? What's the next step? Jesus, send me and I'll go. And yet we lose sight of the simple fact that Jesus might well have in fact put us here in the place we need to be right now. Sometimes the message isn't to go, but it's to stay. We need to learn to love the very place that Jesus has already placed us in, and to stop trying to focus on the next step, but learn to love this step and this place you're in for however long you're in it. And in this passage, there are a few critical things that when we unpack, I think can help us understand some of the things that we might need to be aware of or face up to when Jesus calls us to love the place we're in. So firstly, it might not be the place you want to be. This man begged Jesus to leave. I know I've already said it, but I think it's worth saying again. He begged. There's not much more detail than that, but rarely I would say is begging a dignified or a controlled response. I don't think it's too far to say that he wasn't interested in staying. He just wanted to go and be with Jesus. He wanted to get out, go and be with the one who had healed him. Maybe it was the fact that he had history in the place and he wanted to move on, get away, step into this new life. The phrase new year, new me comes to mind. And yet, I can anticipate that's the situation for many of us here today. And the reality is, you don't even want to be here. Perhaps it's the job that's led you here, but it's not the place you'd have chosen. Perhaps you had to come here to look after a family member. Maybe you're a student and Manchester was your only choice available. Maybe you're like this man. You've got history here and you would love to move on from it, but you can't get out. But for some people, have you considered the possibility that even though it might not be the place you'd want to be in, here could exactly be where you need to be? Regardless of why you're here, you can embrace all that Jesus has for you in Manchester. Secondly, to stay might have a cost. This man will have been well known amongst the town. And even from the brief description here that we get from the three Gospels that the story appears, it's clear that he had a dark, embarrassing, painful history in this town before he was healed. It says that he would live amongst the tombs, not simply hang out or visit them. If you were a resident in the local town, that meant you weren't able to bury your friends and family in the area that had perhaps generations buried there. Nor could you visit the graves of those loved ones who you'd lost without fearing of being attacked. Some, perhaps many, of the people in this town physically fought against this man. It says that no one was strong enough to subdue him. I think we can therefore assume that people had tried to overpower him, and yet he'd fought them off every time. He not only attacked others, but he would also harm himself, cutting his body with stones. Then amongst all of this, it says that amongst the tombs and the hills, he would cry out day and night. Now Emma and I, Emma is my lovely wife, and we don't have kids. However, the couple who live in the flat right above us have recently had this gorgeous baby, and thanks to the near constant crying sounds coming through our very thin ceiling above us, I'm currently in a place of very much empathizing with the locals regarding the day and night crying. And to any parents with babies or people who have journeyed through the baby stage of life, I just want you to know that you have my utmost respect. But no matter our experience, I think we can all agree, day and night crying, it's not the one. Then to top it all off, you have the financial cost of healing this man. In Mark's gospel, it says that it was 2,000 pigs that Jesus permitted the demons to enter and who were then drowned. Now, I'll confess, I tried to Google the cost of a pig 2,000 years ago, and it won't be surprised that Google search wasn't the most fruitful. But I therefore decided to try and Google the cost of a pig today. And from the brief research I did, I learned that it massively varies on size, breed, and age. And it was this point I decided that I was done spending my time reading through Pigworld and sellmylivestock.com. But have no fear. My research brought about some vague numbers. Really vague. And what I did glean is that for a 1-year-old pig, it seems that it's not out of the, this is very serious research, it's not out of the possibility that this might cost around £250. So you multiply that by 2,000, and that means in today's money, that healing would have cost someone £500,000. So, when Jesus tells this man he can't go with him, but to go home and share how much the Lord has done for him, there was undoubtedly going to be a cost to him staying and facing his past. And yet, that is exactly what Jesus asks of this man. Jesus makes it clear throughout Scripture that to say yes to him will cost. It will require us to pick up our cross. But how easily do I forget this amongst my Western comfort and security? Maybe some of us here today need to hear this, that to say yes to Jesus will be costly. To stay when there might be history to face might cost, but that doesn't mean that it's not right. What else can we learn from this passage about loving the place we're in? Well, thirdly, Jesus might be the one closing the door to other options. I remember deciding I wanted to go to university and searching for where to study. I was incredibly fortunate to go to a school where it was assumed you went to uni. And not just that, you went to uni, but you had aspirations to go to somewhere like Oxford, Cambridge, Durham. And it was expected that you would work hard and get the grades that opened up those opportunities. Now, I decided that I wanted to study history. I loved it, and it was what I wanted to do. So I went to the open days of these immense and impressive universities and thought, yes, these must be the ones. When it came to taking my exams, I worked hard. I put all my effort in to get the results I knew I needed. And then when the results came in and I opened that letter, And what was the one subject that I dropped the grade in that I needed in order to make my plans come together? It was history. I was so upset. I'd worked so hard, I'd given so much, and yet the door to those dreams had closed. I began to look at other universities, but don't forget that the grade that I'd fallen down on was the very subject that I wanted to study, which made things so much harder for me. I jumped forward, and I ended up at a totally different university to the one I'd have previously considered. I arrived there as someone who had painful scars that needed healing, a faith that was drifting, and I had no idea that whilst I was there, I would encounter Jesus in a way that would change my life. Now, I'm not going to delve into the theoretical discussion of if I'd gone to a different city, whether I'd have still met Jesus in the same powerful way. But what I do know is that city, those people, and that church saved my life from the direction it was heading in. When those doors to other university options closed so suddenly, I had no idea the path that Jesus was laying out for me. And yet, by me ending up where I did, it's one of the few moments in my life where I can honestly say, Jesus wanted me there. When this man, who was demon-possessed, begged Jesus to go with him, it's pretty clear what his preference was. He wanted to get out. He wanted to follow Jesus. He wanted to be with the man who had saved his life. And yet Jesus asks him to stay. Jesus closed the door and sent him down a path that this man in that moment didn't want to go down. And the Bible is littered. It's littered with stories of men and women who God takes them down a path that they would have not have chosen, and yet it leads to amazing wonders. Joseph is betrayed, bless you, by his brothers. Joseph is betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused of terrible crimes, and then thrown and forgotten in prison. And yet he ends up saving the whole of Egypt. Ruth loses her husband, moves to a foreign land, is poor and destitute, and yet is redeemed through her marriage to Boaz, and will give birth to the line of King David and ultimately Jesus. The Apostle Paul was a terrorist, arresting and killing Christians until Jesus meets him, blinds him, saves him, and he would go on to be the greatest church planter that ever lived. We often talk about Jesus being the God that opens doors, and he does. But he also sometimes is a God who closes doors. And whilst in that moment it can be hard to understand why when he does this, it is for our good. Which leads me on to my fourth and final learning from this story. Whilst it can seem like life is closing you off, Jesus can actually be inviting you in. Jesus didn't simply say no to this man. He invites him into something else. And in Mark's gospel, he says to him, go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. While this man didn't get to enter into the boat with Jesus, while he doesn't get to go where he wants to go, Jesus calls him into something more. He calls him to share the good news of what has happened to him in the very place he himself would terrorize. He goes home and shares simply what Jesus has done for him, and it says that people were amazed. Many of those people will have known him, seen him, and feared him. And yet, because he says yes to Jesus, he turns back and chooses to love the very place he tried to flee from. The good news of Jesus was shared, and the simple fact that this story is written in 3 of the 4 Gospels of the most famous, the most translated book of all time, means this story is not only never forgotten, but immortalized in time. We sometimes need to stop focusing on the next thing, and in fact, remember where it is our feet currently are. I'm not saying planning for the future is wrong, and I'm definitely not saying that leaving or moving is against the will of God. Church planting would be a lot more challenging if we didn't go and plant the church. However, it can sometimes be so easy to focus on what Jesus has ahead that we forget that Jesus also has plans for us here and now. We need to be people that don't just long to go, but also love the place we stay. It might not be the place you want to be. It might have a cost. Jesus might have closed off some doors, but he also might well have opened some others right here if we would be just to stop, listen, and embrace it. So how do we do that? How do we open ourselves to Jesus in a way that means we can embrace and love the place we're at? So that we're not just a people who go well, but also a people who stay well. There's many practical things that we can all do, but I'm just going to share a few that for me and others have really helped. The first is walk the place. In a day of cars and public transport and lovely distractions like music and podcasts or social media, we can so easily end up being in a place and yet oblivious to it and not really know it. But when we slow down and just walk with our eyes and ears open, we can really experience somewhere and start to really know it. We get to see it fully, hear it fully. And whilst it's likely not going to be all that nice, sometimes it will be real. And it can help us get to know the place we live in. And once we really get to know the place, it can open ourselves to Jesus moving in us, seeing things the way he sees them, and aligning ourselves to what he is doing. We just need to slow down, cut out the clutter, and really make space to see what is in front of us. Number 2, it is pray for the place. I know this is really the most Sunday school of answers, but it's true. Prayer works. When we pray, we lay our requests before the Lord, knowing that he listens and longs to answer them. That means we can pray for our city, knowing God hears them and wants to see this place shaped by his Holy Spirit. But prayer not only is a way we can ask things of Jesus, but it also does something in us. It helps us figure out what is on our heart, what we really care about, and can align us to what is also on the Father's heart. The thing that I found in my life is that the more I pray, and particularly the more I remember to pray about certain things, the more I find myself caring for them. When we pray, we tell our Father in heaven and our own heart, this is a priority. Now, Manchester Vineyard has been in several locations during its life, and one of them was in Ardwick. And when MV first moved there, we went out and we flyed and prayed and walked around 1,000 homes in that area. We laid the spiritual groundwork for what we went on to do for many years in that place, including launching a 422 community hub. I think it's fair to say we saw and are continuing to see some of the fruit of our time and the effort we sowed in. As another example, I used to know someone who was a real runner. You know the people, the ones who you run alongside, and whilst you're sweating and busting a gut, they look like they're just out for like a casual stroll and still just holding a full conversation whilst you're just dying inside. I mean, this guy once ran casually and ended up accidentally running a half marathon. Who accidentally runs a half marathon? But other than the fact that he was a running machine, he told me that one of the things he would do whilst he ran is he would never listen to music. He would just pray for the local area, the people and the streets he ran by. He actually happened to live in the same area Emma used to teach in. And whilst he actually never met Emma, on multiple occasions he would come into work and say how over the weekend he ran by the school and prayed for Emma and for the teachers and for those kids. I was amazed by his faithfulness and his determination to love that place. God was breaking his heart for it, and he was sowing spiritual seeds every time he went out. You maybe don't need to pray run. You really don't need to pray run. But I know that I could be better building prayer rhythms for this city and some of the natural rhythms of my life. Like when I'm out for a walk or stuck in traffic or heading to the supermarket. Using these opportunities to pray for this place and what it is around me and allowing my heart to break for it and just to see what Jesus does. Thirdly, we need to embrace the place. Every village, town, city, area has a history and a culture alongside that history. And we often give ourselves a barrier to being able to fully love and embrace a place if we don't at least recognize that. Now, when I first came to Manchester, I couldn't have cared less about football. I grew up in a family where no one was really fussed about it, and as a classical cellist history nerd, it doesn't tend to align with football fanatic. But after moving to Manchester and joining MV, I quickly noticed that one thing that always came up, particularly with newcomers and locals, was the football. It was like a second language that I just couldn't speak. On the back of that, I made the intentional effort to follow the football a little bit more, see what was going on in the league, learn more about some of the history of Man United and Man City. And I wasn't trying to become an expert, but by putting in the effort to embrace that part of the history and culture of this city, it opened me up to more of its beauty and unique qualities, and to understand how I could love it better and meet the people in it better. Manchester has a really awesome, rich history and culture, and it's not just around sport. It's a live music hub. It's a centre for journalism. It's where Coronation Street, the world's longest running soap, is filmed and based in. It's a historically industrial powerhouse. It's a key focal point for women's suffrage. It's the place where Vimto was invented. The fact that that got the biggest cheer. Anyway. By being aware of the place's history and embracing it, we open ourselves to loving it better and understanding how to love it better. Fourthly, sacrifice for the place. When we give something of ourselves to something, it does something in our heart. This week, Emma and I have been glued to the screen, watching the Olympics, watching these epic athletes who have given everything in order to be there. And once in a 4-year cycle, they have the chance to win the greatest sporting achievement of all time. They have sacrificed time and energy and relationships in order to be there competing at the highest level. And you see it on the faces of each athlete, how much it means to them when they do or don't achieve their goals, because they have given so much for it. Another way to allow yourself to love the place where your 2 feet are, is to sacrifice for it. We run a 422 hub that is doing incredible work in this city and is always in need of volunteers to support their efforts to love some of the poorest and most marginalized in this city. Maybe that's somewhere you can sacrifice. Perhaps it's not serving on something, but it's simply choosing to let go a little of one place of comfort and let this place become a safe place for you. I remember when I was at uni and some of my friends on their reading weeks, or when they had hard bits of work to do, they would go back to their parents, retreating back to the place they'd always known and the comforts it brought. And of course, whilst that in itself isn't a bad thing, over time, I did come to notice that many of those same people were the ones that never really felt like they had a home there, or they never really had the same love for the place as myself and many others did. And I do think part of that reason for that was when things got hard or when they had the chance for them freedom, they would choose the comfort they'd always known rather than take that initially more risky option and sacrifice that comfort to allow where they were now to become a new safe space and a source of comfort. Whatever it might be, you can explore finding a way you could give something back or sacrifice in a way that opens your heart more to this place. And just see how your heart grows for it. Lastly, enjoy the place. One of the best ways to build a bond and love for an area or a city or a town or whatever it is to simply enjoy it. Find the things about it, about the place that you're in, that you love, and have fun. Here in Manchester, as already mentioned, we've got incredible live sport. Maybe go watch a game. Or if that's not possible, find a local pub and watch it there. We have beautiful green spaces throughout the city where you can walk or chuck a frisbee or kick a ball. On our doorstep, we have the Peak District that's filled with stunning walks. We have art all around us and exhibitions often freely available. Emma and I were in Italy last summer and we stand by some of the best pizza we've ever had is here in Manchester. Enjoying a place doesn't have to cost a load of money, but it is a choice to get out and embrace the goodness that is there. And there is a lot here. And when we do that, we do often find ourselves growing closer to it. So,
We need to be a people that goes. Of course we do. But we also need to be a people that stays. The early church would have really struggled to make roots in their community if every member was a nomadic and nobody actually thought to stay and be the followers of Jesus in the place that they were in. We will all have a story of what brought us to this city for this time. We will all have a history we're carrying. Some of us might be thrilled to be here. Others, you might be on your hands and knees feeling stuck. Whatever your context, Jesus has put you here for a time such as this. And don't miss out on the chance to love this place, to allow Jesus to break your heart for it and do amazing things through you in it. Yes, we need to be willing to go, but we also need to sometimes be brave and be willing to stay and be active in embracing that. So we're going to make some space. Perhaps you know that you're in the right place, but for whatever reason, you wish it wasn't here. Maybe you're struggling to love the place you're in right now. Maybe you've been here your whole life, but have just never given it a second thought. Maybe you've never really embraced with Jesus that you're in Manchester right now, and he might have plans for you. Also, I want to say that you might actually be here now, and it's not so much about loving the place, but you've never actually experienced the love of Jesus for yourself. And you'd like to welcome him into your own heart for the first time. And if that's you, I want you to know that you're so, so welcome here. And if you'd like, we would love to pray with you and invite you into a relationship with him. So why don't we stand? And we're just going to wait on the Lord and see what he wants to do just for a little bit.